What happens when Hollywood's most genuine star walks into what should be a simple talk show interview, only to face a host who crosses every line imaginable? It only took 35 seconds of one single comment for a friendly conversation to spiral into one of the most explosive moments in late night television history. This is the story of how Mark Wahlberg, a man who built his career on authenticity and hard work, found himself face to face with a host who seemed determined to tear him down, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to do but walk away. The stage was set like any other evening. The cameras were rolling. The audience was buzzing with excitement, and Mark Wahlberg sat down in the guest chair with that classic smile everyone knows. He was there to talk about his latest film, to share some stories, maybe crack a few jokes. Just another night of promotion. Just another interview. But Bill Maher had different plans. From the moment Mark settled into his seat, something felt off. The energy in the room was strange. Bill leaned back in his chair with this smirk, this look that said he knew something nobody else did. The kind of look that makes your stomach turn. "So Mark," Bill started, his voice dripping with something that wasn't quite friendliness. "Thanks for coming on the show. I know you've got this new movie out. Another action film, right? Another one of those tough guy roles you seem to love so much." Mark nodded, keeping it professional. "Yeah, it's a great project. Really proud of the work everyone put into it. The cast was incredible. The director had this vision that just..." Right, Bill interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "But let's talk about something more interesting than another exploding car chase. Let's talk about your past." The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the usual softball interview they expected. Mark's smile tightened just a bit, but he kept his cool. "Sure, what do you want to know?" Bill leaned forward, and that smirk grew wider. "Well, you came from the streets of Boston, right? Tough neighborhood. You've talked about it before. Made some mistakes when you were younger. But here's what I find fascinating. You went from that life to becoming this massive movie star, making millions of dollars, living in mansions. Do you ever feel like a fraud? Like you're playing dress up in a world you don't really belong in?" You could feel the air getting sucked out of the room. The audience went silent. Mark's jaw clenched, but he took a breath. "I don't think there's anything fraudulent about working hard and changing your life. I put in the work. I earned everything I have." "Did you, though?" Bill shot back, his tone getting sharper. "I mean, let's be honest. You got lucky. Right place, right time. A lot of people work hard. They don't end up as movie stars. They end up working 3 jobs just to survive. But you got to play pretend for millions of dollars." Mark's eyes narrowed. "With all due respect, Bill, you don't know anything about my journey. You don't know the hours I put in, the rejection I faced, the times I wanted to quit but didn't. This wasn't luck. This was dedication." "Dedication?" Bill repeated, almost mocking the word. "That's a nice word. Here's another word. Privilege. You're a white guy from Boston who got every opportunity handed to him once you got your foot in the door. Meanwhile, there are people of color who work twice as hard and never get a fraction of what you have. How do you reconcile that?" The audience gasped. Some people started murmuring. This was going completely off the rails. Mark sat up straighter, his voice getting firmer. "First of all, I've never denied that I've had opportunities. But I've also worked with and supported countless artists of all backgrounds. I don't sit around apologizing for working hard and making something of myself. And I definitely don't appreciate you making assumptions about my character when you barely know me." Bill laughed. Actually laughed, like this was all some kind of game. "Oh, here we go. The defensive movie star routine. Can't handle a little criticism? Can't handle someone pointing out the obvious? This is exactly what I'm talking about. You Hollywood types live in this bubble where everyone kisses your feet, and the moment someone asks a real question, you fall apart." A real question? Mark's voice rose slightly. You're not asking questions, Bill. You're making accusations. There's a difference. You invited me here to talk about my work, and instead, you're trying to make me out to be some kind of villain. I'm not trying to make you anything, Bill said, his voice cold now. I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. You're not special. You're not some working-class hero. You're just another actor who got lucky and now pretends like you earned every single thing through pure grit. It's boring. It's predictable. And frankly, it's insulting to people who actually struggle. Mark stared at him for a long moment. The camera zoomed in on his face, capturing every emotion. Anger, disbelief, disappointment. You know what, Bill? I came here tonight to have a conversation, to talk about art, about storytelling, about the things I'm passionate about. But clearly, you had a different agenda. You wanted to tear someone down to make yourself feel bigger. That says a lot more about you than it does about me. Oh, please, Bill scoffed. Don't act like you're taking the high road here. You're just upset because someone finally called you out. You can't handle it. None of you Hollywood people can handle it. You live in your mansions, you make your millions, and then you pretend like you're just regular folks. It's pathetic. The audience was completely silent now. You could hear a pin drop. Some people looked shocked. Others looked uncomfortable. But everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Mark's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. I've been patient with you, Bill. I've tried to have a respectful conversation, but you're not interested in respect. You're interested in controversy. You want to create a moment, get some headlines, maybe go viral. Well, congratulations. You got your moment. What's that supposed to mean? Bill asked, but there was something different in his voice now. A slight edge of concern. It means I'm done, Mark said simply. I'm done being disrespected. I'm done being talked down to. I'm done being your punching bag for the night. Bill's smirk faltered. Wait, you're not actually... I am, Mark interrupted, standing up from his chair. The microphone clipped to his shirt picked up every word clearly. I've been in this industry for decades. I've done hundreds of interviews. I've sat across from some of the toughest journalists, the hardest critics, the most challenging conversations. But I've never, not once, been treated with such blatant disrespect for no reason other than your own ego. Sit down, Mark, Bill said, trying to sound authoritative but coming off as desperate. We're in the middle of a show. You can't just... I can and I am, Mark shot back. You invited me here as a guest. A guest is supposed to be treated with basic dignity. You've shown me none of that. You've attacked my character, my career, my integrity, and for what? To prove some point that only makes sense in your head? Bill stood up too now, his face flushing red. You're being incredibly unprofessional right now. We have cameras rolling. We have an audience. You can't just walk off my show. Watch me, Mark said, already unclipping his microphone. You know what the real problem is, Bill? You think being provocative makes you interesting. You think insulting people makes you edgy. But all it really does is make you small. It makes you look like someone who has to tear others down because you can't build yourself up. That's rich coming from someone who makes action movies for a living. Bill sneered, his composure completely gone now. Real tough guy, huh? Can't even handle a conversation without running away. Mark paused, turned back to face him directly. The camera caught everything. His expression was calm, but his eyes were fierce. I'm not running away from a conversation, Bill. I'm walking away from an ambush. There's a difference. A conversation requires two people who respect each other. This, he gestured between them, this was never a conversation. This was you trying to humiliate me on television, and I won't stand for it. You're making a huge mistake, Bill said, his voice rising. Do you know how many people would kill to be on this show? Do you know how many careers I've helped? You walk off this stage, and you're burning a bridge you can't rebuild. Mark actually smiled at that, But it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who just realized they're dealing with someone completely delusional. Bill, you're not that important. You're really not. This show, this interview, none of it matters compared to my self-respect. And right now, staying in this chair, listening to you insult me, that would cost me my self-respect. So yeah, I'm walking away, and I'm fine with that. The audience started murmuring louder now. Some people were pulling out their phones. Others were looking at each other in shock. This was unprecedented. Nobody walks off a talk show. Nobody defies a host like this. But Mark Wahlberg was doing exactly that. Bill's face was now completely red. He looked at the cameras, then at the audience, then back at Mark. You're really doing this? You're really going to throw a tantrum and storm off like a child? Call it whatever you want, Mark said, his voice steady. I call it having standards. I call it knowing my worth. I call it refusing to be disrespected by someone who clearly has their own issues to work through. My issues? Bill's voice cracked slightly. You're the one who can't handle criticism. You're the one who's so fragile that a few tough questions make you flee. Those weren't tough questions, Bill, Mark said, shaking his head. Tough questions are about my craft, my choices, my work. What you did was launch personal attacks disguised as questions. You questioned my integrity, my character, my entire life story, and you did it with this smug attitude, like you know me, like you understand my journey. You don't. You have no idea what I've been through, what I've overcome, what I've sacrificed to get here. Bill opened his mouth to respond, but Mark kept going. And you know what the saddest part is? You could have had a great interview tonight. I came here ready to talk, ready to open up, ready to share stories that people might find interesting or inspiring. But you threw all that away because you wanted to play some kind of gotcha game. You wanted to be the host who made Mark Wahlberg uncomfortable. Well, mission accomplished. I'm uncomfortable, but not because you got under my skin. I'm uncomfortable because I'm sitting across from someone who values confrontation over connection. The audience was completely transfixed. Some people were nodding. Others had their hands over their mouths. This wasn't just a celebrity walking off a show. This was a moment, a real, raw, unscripted moment of someone standing up for themselves. Bill tried to regain control. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. Clearly, our guest tonight isn't as tough as the characters he plays. He talks about being from the streets, about being a fighter, but the moment things get real, he runs away. Mark stopped walking toward the exit. He turned around one more time. The cameras followed him, capturing every second. You want to talk about being real, Bill? Let's talk about what's real. What's real is that you hide behind this desk, behind your cameras, behind your audience, and you attack people who can't fight back on equal terms. You control the narrative. You control the edit. You control everything. And when someone like me decides they're not going to play your game, you panic. Because without people willing to be your victims, you've got nothing. Get out, Bill said, his voice shaking with anger. Get off my stage. Get out of my studio. I'm already leaving, Mark said calmly. You don't have to tell me twice, but I want everyone watching to understand something. Standing up for yourself isn't running away. Refusing to be disrespected isn't being weak. And walking away from toxicity isn't quitting. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is say no. No to being treated poorly. No to being someone's punching bag. No to compromising your dignity for someone else's entertainment. Bill slammed his hand on his desk. This is my show. My show. You don't get to stand there and lecture me. You don't get to act like you're some moral authority. You're an actor. You pretend for a living. And you're a talk show host who forgot how to have a conversation, Mark replied. At least I'm honest about what I do. I make movies. I tell stories. I entertain people. I don't pretend to be some intellectual superior who has all the answers. I don't sit in judgment of everyone who walks through that door. You do. And tonight, that attitude cost you. Cost me what? Bill demanded. You think anyone's going to care about this tomorrow? You think this matters? Mark looked directly into the camera, speaking to the millions of people who would eventually watch this. It matters to me. It matters that I stood up for myself. It matters that I didn't just sit there and take it. It matters that I showed people that it's okay to walk away from situations that don't serve you. That's what matters. Bill was practically shaking now. You're going to regret this. You think you can just embarrass me on my own show and walk away like nothing happened? You think there won't be consequences? The only person who should feel embarrassed here is you, Mark said quietly. You had a guest who came here in good faith. Someone who's been doing this long enough to know how interviews work. And you treated him like garbage. You can threaten consequences all you want, Bill. But at the end of the day, I'm going to sleep just fine tonight, knowing I didn't compromise who I am. Can you say the same? The silence that followed was deafening. Bill stood there, mouth slightly open, clearly searching for something to say. Something clever. Something biting. Something that would give him the last word. But nothing came. He had nothing left. Mark gave a small nod, more to himself than anyone else, and turned toward the exit. His footsteps echoed in the silent studio. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay quiet. Some people started clapping. Softly. Then more joined in, until there was a wave of applause following Mark as he walked away. It wasn't the kind of applause Bill was used to hearing on his show. This wasn't for him. This was for the man who had enough respect for himself to leave. Bill stood at his desk, watching his guest walk away, watching his carefully controlled show fall apart in real time. His hands were clenched into fists. His jaw was tight. He looked at the cameras, then at his producers off stage, clearly panicking about what to do next. We'll be right back after this break, he finally managed to say, his voice hollow. But Mark was already gone, already out the door, already done with the whole situation. The cameras kept rolling for a few more seconds, capturing Bill's face as he realized what had just happened. The smugness was gone. The confidence was gone. All that remained was a man who had pushed too far and lost control of his own show. A man who had tried to break someone down and instead revealed his own cracks. Mark Wahlberg walked through the backstage area with his head held high. Staff members stepped aside, some offering sympathetic looks, others avoiding eye contact altogether. Nobody tried to stop him. Nobody asked him to reconsider. They all knew what had happened out there. They all knew who was in the wrong. As Mark pushed through the exit doors and stepped into the cool night air, he took a deep breath. The adrenaline was still pumping through his veins. His heart was still racing. But he felt good. He felt right. He had stood up for himself when it mattered most. He had refused to be diminished by someone who got their power from diminishing others. Behind him, inside that studio, Bill was scrambling to regain control. Trying to spin the narrative. Trying to make himself look like the victim. But the cameras had caught everything. The audience had seen everything. And soon, the whole world would see everything. This was more than just a celebrity walking off a talk show. This was a statement, a line in the sand, a moment that said enough is enough. Mark Wahlberg had come to that studio as a guest, ready to promote his film, ready to have a good time. But he left as something more. He left as someone who showed millions of people that you don't have to accept mistreatment just because someone has a platform. You don't have to smile through disrespect just because cameras are rolling. You don't have to sacrifice your dignity for anyone's entertainment. The interview that was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance had turned into something far more significant. It became a moment of truth, A moment where Hollywood polish gave way to raw authenticity. A moment where a man who had spent his entire career being underestimated and stereotyped finally said no more. Bill Maher had thought he could toy with Mark Wahlberg. He had thought he could push buttons and get interesting television. He had thought wrong, because what he got instead was a masterclass in self-respect, a lesson in knowing when to stand your ground and when to walk away, a demonstration of strength that had nothing to do with muscles or movie roles and everything to do with character. As Mark got into his car and drove away from that studio, he didn't look back. There was no need to. He knew he had made the right choice. He knew that some bridges are worth burning if they lead to places that don't respect you. He knew that walking away wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. The interview had lasted less than 15 minutes. 15 minutes that felt like an eternity. 15 minutes that would be replayed and analyzed and discussed for years to come. 15 minutes that proved a simple truth that everyone knows, but often forgets. You teach people how to treat you, and sometimes teaching that lesson means getting up and walking away. Bill had learned that lesson the hard way. He had learned that his platform didn't give him permission to treat people however he wanted. He had learned that his audience wasn't always going to side with him just because he was the host. He had learned that pushing people has consequences. And sometimes those consequences come in the form of an empty chair and a studio full of people who just witnessed a complete breakdown of professional courtesy. The show eventually went to commercial. The producers scrambled to fill the rest of the episode. The audience slowly filed out, buzzing with conversation about what they had just witnessed. And Bill sat at his desk, staring at that empty chair, perhaps for the first time realizing that he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. But Mark Wahlberg was already miles away, already moving on, already knowing that he had done exactly what needed to be done. He had stood up. He had spoken his truth. He had walked away. And in doing so, he had shown everyone watching that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is goodbye.